My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, and that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask your pardon for my sins, for the grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Immaculate Mother, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. In these days he went out to the hills to pray, and all night he continued in prayer to God. Jesus, it's good for us to see in today's gospel your habit of prayer and your generosity in prayer. Jesus, you pray all night, focusing your attention and your intentions and your very being on God the Father. What a wonderful example for us. We are not as holy as Jesus. Jesus was true God and true man, perfect God and perfect man. And yet he needed to pray, and he made time for prayer, and he sacrificed to pray. He sacrificed sleep. And we too, Jesus, we want to be generous in our prayer life, committed to prayer like you were. And the result of Jesus' prayer in this instance is the vocation of the 12 apostles. And when it was day, he called his disciples and chose from them 12, whom he named apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, and Andrew his brother, and James and John and Philip and Bartholomew, and Matthew and Thomas, and James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who is called the Zealot, and Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And today the church remembers and celebrates the feast day of two of these 12 apostles. Simon the Zealot, Simon who is called the Zealot, and Judas the son of James, commonly called in English Simon and Jude. And I think these are good apostles for us to pray about and to reflect on in your presence, Jesus, because they're not the stars of the apostles. They're not, we could say, the first among the apostles. When we think of the 12 apostles, immediately there comes to mind Peter and James and John. And then maybe after that, Matthew and Thomas. But Simon and Jude are kind of like these hidden apostles. To use an analogy from sports, we can call them kind of role players, right? They're not the superstars among the apostles. They're not the team captains. They're not the all-stars. They're role players. And yet, they're role players on this incredible championship team. They have an important role to play, even though they're not as famous or well recognized. And their roles are a little bit, we could say, less central than the role of, say, Peter especially. And this is so good for us. Most of us in the church are role players. We're not superstars. We're not team captains. We have, in the great scheme of things, in the grand scheme of things, an important role to play. We're all other Christ. We all are carrying out the mission of the church. We're all called to sanctity. And yet, in the grand scheme of things, we're role players. We're not the big shots. And this is what God wants for us. And so this is something we should embrace and accept. We should accept our role in life. We should accept the place that God has given us in the church. However humble it may seem, however ordinary it may be, this is where God wants me. Right where I am, right where my vocation calls me to be, in the church. And yet we're still part of something awesome. We're still part of this championship team. We're still part of this incredible rock band of great stars making great music. We could say that compared to John Lennon and Paul McCartney of the Beatles, we're kind of like Ringo, right? Ringo Starr, the drummer, who everyone says, well, he wasn't that great. He wasn't that important. He didn't write that many songs. And yet there he is. There he is, one of the 4 Beatles. Ringo Starr, famous all over the world for being a member of this team. Even though we could say compared to John and Paul and even George Harrison, Ringo is more of a role player, a secondary figure. Speaking of rock bands, one of my favorite bands right now is a band called The Killers. And The Killers have a song called Be Still. And it's got a lot of biblical allusions in it. And one of the lines I like a lot, it says, "Don't break character. You've got a lot of heart. Rise up like the sun and labor till the work is done." And this is part of the trick, part of the task of being a good Christian. Not to break character, to accept the character that God has planned for us, to accept that role that God has assigned us in our life, and to have heart. Don't break character. You've got a lot of heart. You've got a capacity to love the people that God has put in our life, to love the people that are counting on us for our help, for our example, for our commitment, for our fidelity, for our prayers. A lot is depending on us. A lot is depending on us accepting our role, not breaking character, and doing it well. And day in and day out, rise up like the sun and labor until the work is done. And sometimes this is hard. The modern culture places a lot of emphasis on self-expression, on creativity, on a certain autonomy. And if we don't temper that, if we don't understand it in a good way, well, we can think our life is just arbitrary or random. And we could think that, well, I have the right to start over and break off my commitments in a radical way and to reinvent myself in some new and alluring and perhaps exciting way. And that's a huge mistake if that's not God's plan for us, if it's not in response to something that we think that God really wants from us. Then those big changes, those abandonments of commitments and relationships and people and our place is not going to lead anywhere good, right? It's going to be a kind of a wrong turn or a dead end. The role that God has given us, the vocation that God has given us, our part in the church is not arbitrary. It's part of God's eternal plan for us. Yeah, we have to discover it, we have to make it our own, we have to use our freedom to take initiative in it, to live it the best we can, with freedom, initiative, and responsibility. But we can't just arbitrarily scratch it and go back to square one and start over as if God didn't give us a certain vocation or a certain place in life, as if he didn't intervene and say to us, hey, this is who I want you to be. This is your role. And role players are important, right? Even though we might not have the impact of a St. Peter or a St. Paul or a St. John, nevertheless, those other apostles like today's saints, Simon and Jude, are super important for the people that they led and super important for the people that they preached the gospel to, and super important for the whole church, even though they're less prominent and hidden, right? They're still apostles. They're still great saints. Many things depended on them, on their fidelity, on their vocation, on their love for God. They were rock stars in their own right. And we too, we're all called in a certain sense to be heroes to the people who know us, to be heroes to the people who are closest to us. Any good mother or father is a hero to her sons and daughters, eventually when they figure out how lucky they were, how blessed they were to have such a good mother or father. Lord, help us to be rock stars for those around us, heroes for those in our own life. I thank you, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations which you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask your help to put them into effect, my Immaculate Mother, St. Joseph, my Father and Lord. May guardian angel intercede for me.